should we be offended by this?
Yeah, and which is the more offensive? Is it the F word or is it the Mormons?
Mornings are better with a warm beverage, even for Latter-day Saints. Meet Postum, the ideal coffee alternative and proud sponsor of This Week in Mormons podcast. Spotted on the coffee aisle at Smith's Grocery or at your local nearby store. Can't locate it? No worries. Order it at postum.com. Explore delicious recipes to tailor your Postum experience. Start your day off right with Postum.
Welcome to This Week in Mormons. I am your host, Jeff.
And I am Jeff's friend, JJ.
And we're back for a second time. Excited to be here. And JJ, what did you think of our inaugural episode? Any thoughts on how that went?
I thought it's funny that I just said because my main thought was that I used way too many likes and ums.
Yeah.
I just did it again. No, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I thought we did a good job. I thought we had really insightful things to say, and I thought, but like I told you, there were many things that came out of my mouth that when I listened to them on playback, I thought, that's a first draft. There's a different version of what I'm trying to say that I could have got at. So, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun.
Yeah. So in order to prepare for that, we actually just spent an hour talking before recording this to make sure that we didn't have any first draft discussions again. I actually had similar feedback from my mother, and that made me feel a little insecure that my I asked my mom, yeah, so what'd you think of the podcast? She's like, yeah, you need to say less. And I'm like, all right. And then I practiced doing that for the next week and made zero progress because every time that I start to think like I'm not going to say I can't think of
You can't not
anything else.
Forget what you were going to say.
Yeah, I forget what I'm going to say. And so I don't know how people work through that. Oh my goodness. Sorry. I am in my office in Salt Lake City right now, and I guess I'm next to a street that likes to drag race. So sorry about that.
A lot of drag racing going on in Salt Lake City, actually.
Surprising because there's so much construction.
Yeah, big drag race town these days. Well, Jeff, let's dive in to this news, kind of this week's stories. Obviously, the biggest thing in church-related things that happened this past week was the First Presidency Christmas devotional. This is obviously an ongoing tradition for many years now, a long time, to have a broadcast devotional celebrating Christmas. Give me some of your general thoughts, your takeaways from the devotional this year.
Okay, admittedly, I watched this Christmas devotional very attentively because I knew that we were going to talk about it today.
Good.
I used to watch the devotional a lot more when we would actually go to the church to do it. And then since everything kind of went to streaming, it's been a little more difficult. But usually it's just like, honestly, it probably would have just ended up like streaming on a computer or something kind of in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it was really beautiful being able to just take the time and watch and listen. And the thing that I personally really liked about it was the music. Like the music was just I don't know if during general conference they don't use like a live orchestra, right? They just have the organ playing, accompanying
the choir, yeah.
And so it feels almost like upgraded from general conference because they have the whole orchestra playing and they're playing songs that you love to hear every Christmas time, every Christmas. And honestly, it takes me back to my mission, because on my mission, I basically only listen to Mormon Tabernacle Choir music. And around Christmas time, I had some of their Christmas albums, and their Christmas albums are really good.
I believe it's Tabernacle Choir at Temple
Oh, that's right.
Square.
Kurt's gonna get me for that one.
Yeah.
I still call him Motab. It's hard to break that habit. But anyway, it just kind of listening to that music just gives me so much peace, and takes me right back to sort of my little apartment in Argentina, like
Mhm.
listening to their albums must have been doing it on like a Discman, with headphones.
With headphones?
I think so, because I didn't want to bother my companion. I was honestly thinking, I was like, how did I listen to these songs?
Well, my memory of the handbook is that headphones were
Oh, really?
prohibido. Yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Okay, maybe just in Brazil.
maybe it's true. Maybe.
No, I honestly, well, I no, I really was, because I had this memory of like listening to them like next to this like metal chair after saying my nightly prayers, and I was like, how was I listening to these with my companion like sleeping right next to me? And so I assumed that I had headphones.
Hmm.
Anyway, moving on from the music aspect of this, there were four speakers. The young sister Runia from the Young Women General Presidency spoke. Elder Palmer from the Presidency of the 70s spoke. And I particularly liked his talk about giving the three, sort of likening the three gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and likening those to giving the gifts of testimony, forgiveness, and love. I had never thought of testimony as a gift. And so thinking about like giving that gift to others actually struck me. So Elder Cook gave a good talk about Jesus, good Christian message. And then Elder Oaks gave, I thought, a very good talk. And upon reflection, it seems very relevant to sort of our situation, our global situation today. A lot of, sort of global conflict going on, wars between countries, and then also a lot of discussion about what to do with people who are different from us in our own country. Um, Maybe I'll just read one of his quotes here. The spirit of Christmas encourages us to use this season to step across barriers and promote understanding with people of all races, creeds, and national origins. Whether Latter day Saints are in the majority, as we are in Utah, or in the minority, as we are everywhere else, we should reach out to all the sons and daughters of God. We should extend a sincere hand of fellowship to all persons, those who are and those who are not of our faith. Um, he quotes Moses, or he quotes the God's command to Moses: "If a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him, but the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself." And I really liked hearing this message during Christmas and having it sort of tied into Christmas. Just, the whole month of December is just such a wonderful time to like. I actually just went to a screening of It's a Wonderful Life, actually at the Egyptian Theater in Ogden. Have you been there?
Uh-uh. I heard about it. Never been.
It is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like totally renovated, and it's looks exactly like what you would imagine a movie theater would look like back in the 20s. And they showed It's a Wonderful Life there, and um it was beautiful. And that movie just has so many awesome messages, and I just love hearing all these like Christmas messages at the time of Christmas. It's just like, yeah, it gives you like hope,
Yeah.
um maybe
Here's a
that's
question for you.
but
This to me, the Christmas devotional, seems like it's one of the only ongoing traditions, Christmas traditions within the church. Maybe
Yeah.
there's the music and the spoken word, or the tabernacle choir does another big thing. It's not music and the spoken word, but like their thing when they bring in the Muppets and stuff. They usually do that around Christmas time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of their biggest concert of the year, I think. Um, but other than that, and I asked this because somebody recently asked me today because they knew that I was raised LDS. They said, "Do Mormons, because that is still who
Mm-hmm.
they are to everybody else in the whole world. Do Mormons have any sort of unique Mormon Christmas tradition?" And I just thought about it for a while, and I said, I really don't think so. I mean, it's not. It's Mormons love celebrating Christmas and do all the same kinds of things. You have a nativity scene in your house and Christmas tree and everything. But there wasn't anything I can think of that felt particularly unique, except for there's the Christmas devotional. And I also bring that up because I feel like it's more common, much more common now than when I was young, for Mormons to uh, observe Advent, like the Advent calendar. That wasn't something that we were really into, but now, and I feel like it's a little bit of members of the church kind of yearn for more concrete tradition around
Dude,
the traditional Christian holidays. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
this is why we've been friends for a long time,
Yeah,
JJ. And I feel like this is one of the reasons why. It's because we have
some
the
might
same.
say too long, but
Yeah.
go on.
Not me. Um, we have we have the same thoughts. I literally had this exact same conversation with somebody recently about the Advent calendar. Um, how we don't really, and I don't know if that like comes out of our sort of Protestant roots, that we're getting rid of like
Yeah.
ritual calendars and stuff like that, and then we were just sort of so separated from everything, and as LDS people have kind of reintegrated and sort of become more familiar with like other Christian traditions, we've sort of realized like, hey, the Advent calendar actually sounds like really nice, and I mean, I've always done a very light Advent calendar with my family since I was a kid, but I think you're right that everybody does it differently, um, and I think that I would love to hear more from people about sort of LDS focused Christmas traditions and see sort of like what trends we see. But I think you're definitely right that like people really want something to celebrate throughout the month, um, because we all love Christmas and we want it to not just be on the morning of Christmas,
Hmm.
So,
It's
um,
it's interesting because I think in church history you actually hear stories that Joseph Smith really liked to throw a good Christmas party. And there's one story, I can't think of what it was, but there is a story of a something that happens at a Christmas party specifically. And maybe somebody who's listening will remember what I'm referring to. But there was a Christmas party going on, and Joseph Smith got up and announced something or said something. And but yeah, I think you're right though, that it's probably as simple as coming from a Protestant context. Christmas celebrations were not liturgical. They
yeah,
were just community celebrations. They were, people would get together and um, you know drink warm drinks, not hot drinks, of course, but warm ones. And but the liturgical calendar, and what basically stems from Catholicism, I mean, that's where Advent and a lot of those things come from. And I feel like I even see now uh, Latter Day Saints who uh, are more interested in observing even other aspects of the liturgical calendar. Things like, not, I mean, not Ash Wednesday explicitly, but like Holy Week, and and all of that is because the Protestants had separated themselves from the liturgical elements of Catholicism. But now that there's less stigma around all of that, I think you're right. I think that's where people are looking. But before we move on from this topic, I would just ask: is there anything that you think of as maybe low hanging fruit that Latter Day Saints could incorporate into a unique Christmas tradition?
Oh man, that's a good question. That we haven't already done?
Yeah, like just some a way that
No,
I'll
man.
tell
I
you
mean,
while you're thinking
I
about it. I'll tell you something that has
okay.
came to my mind, which I thought before, which is it surprises me. I think when I was younger, this did come up every once in a while, but you would think that maybe in the church there would be a greater emphasis on the Book of Mormon account of the events that surrounded the birth of Jesus,
Mm,
specific to the folks kneeling in prayer uh, for because of the miracle of the sun not going down. You know what I'm talking about?
yeah.
Uh, it feels like that story would be told sometimes, around Christmas and kind of emphasized a little bit more. But that's probably the only element of Mormon theology or belief that is unique, that is specific to Christmas, right? So it'd be interesting if people developed a way to kind of celebrate Christmas in a way that kind of honored or reflected the Book of Mormon story that was related to the Nativity. But I don't know how you would do that. If you light a candle for, because how long did the sun not set? It was
Yeah.
you like light a candle or something for that amount of time that the sun never
Or we
set.
don't use lights. We don't use electricity
Yes, you don't use modern energy or power for like a
for that
certain
matter.
stretch of time. But so I don't know how people would do that. But that seems like it would be the kind of thing that maybe somebody would.
Yeah, I like that idea. um, yeah, no, that would be really cool. But I think that the sort of it's a good segue to our next discussion about light the world, of course, and definitely light the world. I think the church themselves sort of picked up on this conversation that we're having about Advent, and they sort of created their own Advent calendar that was not based around some sort of arcane doctrine or history, but was based on action and um, acts of service, and that itself is a very sort of LDS thing to do. Um, and I think it's great. I think it's great. I think it's a great new tradition to move forward. So we're just going to have a couple of new stories related to light the world. Um, the they had I think sort of an opening event for light the world. I don't know exactly when this was, but it was in New York, and a bunch of leaders from charitable organizations gathered for this event in New York City, and the World Food Program USA um, at this event committed to match charitable donations to the World Food Program for the year 2024. They're going to match any of those donations made to their organization. And I thought that was worth mentioning just because that's really awesome, So if they get like $1 million in donations, then that's $2 million in donations. Um, and I could imagine other programs that the church is working with to make similar pledges. So I thought that was exciting. And then they moved the giving machines from their spot, I think, at Times Square, a couple blocks away, to a church, a Catholic church called Our Savior Church on Park Avenue. And it doesn't sound that interesting, but when I read the article that talked about this, they put the giving machines right next to a nativity, and then there was a statement from the Monsignor, I don't know how to say that, Monsignor Kevin Sullivan of the Catholic Archdiocese of New York, and he sort of gave his endorsement for the giving machines, and why they put them next to the nativity. And he said, we've done that intentionally because we want to communicate that if we worship God, we need to give to our neighbors in need. I thank the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for this wonderful initiative gathering us all together, and I invite you all to be givers this season. So it's just nice to see that. I'm sure this has happened before, but to continue to see that the Light the World initiative is not something that it's just like only the church out there sort of doing and pushing, but it seems that other church leaders and um, other churches and other civic leaders and charity leaders are sort of embracing this and moving it forward too. Another sort of continuing here with the Light the World initiative, uh, the Saints in Mexico actually announced a day of service in sort of collaboration with the Light the World initiative. And so I guess Saturday, December 7th, they proclaimed as a national day of service, and saints all around Mexico did service projects. And let's see here. And again, just kind of remind me of, I don't know if there was a day of service. I remember like years ago there was a day of service in the Washington D.C. area, and it was kind of like a big deal there. And I can't remember if the church was like pushing a day of service nationwide or if that was just a DC thing. But so it was just kind of cool to see that Saints in Mexico. It seems like this was something that was um, promoted by the Mexico area presidency. And it's just nice to see like an initiative from, a body of saints outside of the United States sort of take this to the next level and do something that can kind of like gain a lot of attention for the church in their country, you know? And then finally, last sort of story with the Light the World initiative is the first giving machines um, opened in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya. And these giving machines opened in a mall called Sarit. And my understanding is that I guess this retail space was donated uh, by I think maybe the owner of this mall. And they had a nice sort of opening ceremony for these giving machines where they brought a bunch of different choirs. And I think one of the choirs had traveled hours to get there and did this big sort of choir musical number to open the giving machines. And in the giving machines are the programs that are participating are Kenya Red Cross, UNICEF, Uthabiti. Oh man, I'm gonna butcher these names. Uthabiti Africa, Clean Up Kenya, Church World Service, and uh, Caritas Kenya. And I just think it's really cool that, let's see here, that these machines, the people who are giving to these machines are actually people who have received help through the Light the World program, right? And the programs that are being included in the Light the World machines there in Kenya are actually going back to Kenya and back to other countries in Africa. So that was fun. I liked reading that as well. And then last little story, since we're on the topic of Africa, I listened to the Mormon Land podcast. I think last week came out with an episode that talked about the church in Africa and why are there so many members of the church in Africa. And they talked about a couple of different reasons for that, but some of like the sort of um, unique benefits or differences of the church in Africa that would attract people to join. And one of them was that I guess they call the church the quiet church, um, where compared to like other religions, I guess in the area, the LDS church is very quiet and
Uh-huh.
peaceful. And that's something that sometimes I think in the United States, we sort of criticize that a little bit, like we want things to be a little more lively, maybe a little more evangelical. Um, but it's kind of fun to put it into a different perspective and realize like, that peace and quiet is actually like really welcome in some parts. Um, and it's welcome for us too. I think I would prefer having a quiet church, as opposed to like a more loud or lively experience. And then also, they talked about how the church is perceived as a really beneficial organization for women in Africa. Again, something that you wouldn't usually think of here in America, just sort of in the context of our discourse here. But in Africa, um, the I think opportunities for women are on a very different level than they are here, and the church actually, sort of probably brings that Western mentality, um, and in a very proactive way incorporates opportunities for women, educational opportunities, occupational opportunities. And it's also good for women because the church there is good for men. So another thing that they talked about was like teaching the word of wisdom, and how like our prohibition on alcohol was is unique, I guess, there, and how uh, encouraging men to not get drunk and you know um, do things, negative, terrible things when they're in that state, actually makes a difference for the lives of the women there. And so those are just some things that I kind of took away from that podcast that I thought were pretty interesting.
That is interesting. That I know we ended up not keeping it on here, so maybe I'm betraying your editorial judgment, but you had originally had that peculiar people talk
Oh yeah.
on here, and that was one thing that stood out to me is he listed, I think he cited three things, and I don't remember the name of the general authority that gave the talk because it's not in our notes anymore, but he listed off three things that set apart Latter Day Saints as peculiar people, and one of
Mm-hmm.
those was the word of wisdom.
Yep.
Um, I mean, it's quite the achievement for something that was not initially established as a commandment to be the held up as kind of like the primary commandment that separates the Latter Day Saints from everybody else. Um, but that is interesting that was cited by African authorities as a major distinguishing factor.
Yeah, and I think something that is, and that's kind of how I've always felt about the word of wisdom, even though there are aspects of it that seem very inconvenient and maybe a little bit like, okay, maybe we should just sort of like let this go, But I think that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages to it. And I think that you would probably see that in a lot more in different communities that struggle maybe more with some of these vices. Although you could also make a huge argument for how much people, and even in the United States, struggle with a vice like alcohol, and we just don't really talk about it a whole lot.
Yeah, it's interesting though because the word of wisdom as a kind of demarcation, as a way of separating and it is being like a first point of reference for what happens to a community, and it has a lot of Mormon influence, being observance of the word of wisdom, is that it's a behavior, not a belief system, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that the church is gonna. I almost wonder if the church prefers it that way, to be known more for a behavior and not a belief. Um, Especially because I think in our lifetime, when I was young, I do think that there was an assumption that the word of wisdom was kind of a coherent belief system. Because I mean, I grew up in a home where you didn't even drink caffeinated sodas, right? Because the idea was that it was addictive substances generally were to be avoided through the word of wisdom, and the church has kind of come out and formally not like denounced that view of the word of wisdom, but it basically said tea, coffee, and alcohol and illegal drugs are and tobacco. Those are the only things that the word of wisdom, you know, rejects. So that's where I think, because that's another one that I've noticed I've had a hard time explaining to folks out here is when they ask a lot of questions because they know that Latter day Saints are predominantly known for this behavior of not drinking alcohol, not drinking coffee. And when they ask me questions about why, I'm having to give this really convoluted, like,
Yeah.
well, Joseph Smith, had this revelation, but at the time it wasn't dictated as like a commandment that people had to do. It was more of like kind of holy advice, is what the easiest way to look at it. And then over time, it's kind of snowballed into becoming a more central part of the identity for various reasons. And then they always say, but why coffee? And I have to say, I actually have no idea. And it's just interesting to me that the coherent there isn't like the fact that the word of wisdom is becoming more and more a centralized piece of what it means, but there isn't an accompanying like this is what the word of wisdom means and this is how to make sense of all of it. I just wonder how the church is going to navigate all that going forward.
Yeah, there's a part of me, I think that there is a little bit of coherence, which is like resistance to addictive substances and addictive behaviors. The thing
But
is that
that's
they
not to cut
accept,
you off too early, but again, that's I think was an assumption that a lot of people used to have. And I
right.
remember even a gentleman on my mission when we asked him I was doing the baptismal interview and I asked him, "What do you understand about the word of wisdom?" And he just said, "Oh, it's just avoiding things that are addictive." And I prodded him more like, the specific substances that are prohibited, and he said yes, and he listed them. And I think that was a general assumption, but I don't think that there's actually any concrete evidence anywhere. And the church has certainly never kind of formalized or canonized an understanding of the word of wisdom that it was based on restricting addictive substances, especially because there are so many addictive substances in that list, many of which are arguably more pernicious that are just not included in the prohibition. And so I think that's what I mean by like it's a series of like behaviors, but there isn't a belief system. The structure of the belief system behind the word of wisdom isn't nearly as strong as I think a lot of Latter Day Saints assume it
Yeah.
is. But anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, I cut you off. You were kind of giving your take.
Well, I guess I was just going to say, yeah, I think that they're, I'm not totally bought into the fact that like they've like abandoned this like addictive, like, sort of discourse, right? Like, because they still sort of speak out against um, energy drinks, for example. Energy drinks aren't in the
Does the church
list.
speak out against energy drinks?
I think that they have. Yeah, I mean, I know that like there have been articles in the Ensign and stuff like that. Not
Yeah,
they're not saying you cannot take these, but they
yeah.
are saying that energy drinks, should be. I feel like I've seen an article somewhere that said something along those lines, and so anyway, I just think that, but they are kind of running up against history, and they don't really know how to like basically contradict themselves, and and I feel like I honestly don't know what they're doing, but maybe they're just waiting for something,
Because
but I do think that addictive thing hasn't gone away completely, but
I think the reason the addiction angle is tough to sustain is because if the question is addiction or addictive substances, I think a cup of coffee. I mean, I'm as ignorant about coffee as anybody else, but I think your average cup of coffee has like 80 milligrams of caffeine,
yeah.
and I'm pretty sure a Monster has like 160.
Right.
And so that's where the fact that the coffee is strictly prohibited. You shall not have the coffee. And the thing with 160 milligrams of the addictive substance, it is like you would be well advised to avoid this. It
Yeah.
seems like you would have to conclude that the thing that is being prohibited is not the addictiveness of the substance, because one of those substances contains a significantly large portion of the addictive agent than the other. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. But
that's where
the commandment was given, before energy drinks. And so it seems like maybe they're just running into a dilemma where they don't know how to update it. They don't know how to update it without coming off like um, too maybe wishy-washy um, or like I said before, contradicting the past. And so maybe they're just, you could just say that they're just waiting for a revelation to come.
yeah. Well, I don't know. Again, this is fun. I'm glad we're just but
We should
it,
probably move on to the next stories, but yeah, I do.
we
It
should. But
is.
the final point I'll make on that is that the idea that they would need to wait for further revelation on it. I mean, marijuana is something that is explicitly prohibited, even though it's not prohibited in under the guise of the word of wisdom, even though it's not prohibited in the Doctrine and Covenants. And
Yeah,
people who are proponents of marijuana will point out that it talks about herbs are for the body, and that some people try to argue that the Doctrine of Covenants actually leaves a much wider gap to allow for the use of something like cannabis. But under the church's interpretation of the word of wisdom, cannabis is strictly prohibited, even in areas where its use would be legal for medicinal or recreational purposes. Um, and that was accomplished with no new revelation, no new anything like that. Like I actually it'd be very simple for the church to ban other substances, especially if it was because marijuana, you also, it's much harder to make an addiction link to say, well, the reason marijuana is also banned under the word of wisdom is because it's addictive. That's a much more controversial statement than energy drinks are banned under the word of wisdom because they're addictive.
yeah,
That would actually be a much simpler case and kind of like through line theological case to make. So I don't know. It's just an interesting. I'm mostly just highlighting the fact that I think that the church's interest in, and this isn't just a now thing. This is dating back decades. But the church's interest in emphasizing the word of wisdom as a core element of what it means to be a quote unquote peculiar person, it's already in a lot of people out in the world. They ask a lot of questions that the church just doesn't really have answers for
yeah.
about that. So anyway, we can move on. But
And I think we both agree that they need to come up with, yeah, something to say there, because it makes it difficult for us to talk about with people. Okay, so let's move on to our next story, and I'll go ahead and just um, tee this one up. This is actually a story that I saw kind of randomly. I wasn't really looking for it, but when I was a kid, my parents would bring us home these little tins of creamed honey from these monks who lived outside of Ogden. Have you ever heard of this
no,
before? Okay. I'd be interested to know if any of our listeners used to get this honey. But for me, for whatever reason, this is actually like one of my core like food memories as a child, because they had the best flavors of honey. They had raspberry honey, they had pecan honey. I mean, like they had cinnamon honey. I like remember the flavors, and whenever my parents would bring them back, we would like eat them on my mom's like homemade biscuits and stuff, and they were just so good. And then I remember when I moved back to Utah, much, much, much later, I was kind of bummed to learn that we couldn't get this honey anymore because the monastery had closed in 2017. And so I saw a story. Where was this? On Deseret News. So basically, this monastery, which is just outside of Utah, was built in 1947 by refugee Trappist monks, and from World War II, I guess they were refugees from World War II. And because of their dwindling members of the monastery, they had to sell off. They had to sell off the monastery, and there were developers looking at the land and thinking about how they could use it and stuff. But a local resident, Bill White, stepped in and saved the property from a mixed use development and purchased it and basically set it up for preservation. He brought in a local farming family that sort of brought agriculture back to the land, because the monks there didn't only do honey, but they also did other like forms of agriculture and stuff. And apparently there was a wood shop there that this family restored. And so now this old monastery is becoming kind of like a community attraction for organic farming, and I think let's see here, educational workshops, farm to table events, and partnerships with local schools. So just kind of like a cultural sort of spot for the community. Um, let's see here, some quotes from the article. The land had a unique spirit we couldn't ignore. Um, it was about ensuring the farm remained a place for people to gather, share, and celebrate its history. It's about honoring the craftsmanship and the spirit of those who came before us. So it's just really cool to see like this sort of. It's a nice interfaith story, I thought, of some local people. I don't know what their religion is. Maybe they're LDS. Probably they're LDS. But recognizing the value that this monastery brought to the community, and that there was somebody proactive. This didn't come through the church or anything. It was like a grassroots thing, just a local resident who decided to put up a lot of money to save this place. And now it's something that I think will really continue to enrich that community. The guy who bought it, well, no, not the guy who bought it, but the family now who's running it, said, "We feel there's a reason we should be farming the land. The monks may have left, but their spirit is still here." So I just thought that was a really just heartwarming story about, yeah,
Yeah.
coming out of Utah. It was nice to hear.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
All right. Do we want to move on to temple news? Would you
Yeah.
like to take that one?
Yeah, I'll dive in. So we've got a couple of updates on more temple groundbreaking and temple renderings. So the Grand Rapids Temple had its groundbreaking. Elder Matthias Held, who's the first counselor in the North American Northeast area, presided. It's going to be on 10 acres, a single story at 20,000 feet. This was a temple that was announced in 2022. So we're just at the 2-year mark for the groundbreaking. Do you know if that's average?
Is
They
that
announced it in
fast?
2 years. Yeah, it feels fast.
Yeah. It seems fast to me too, but it seemed like there was another temple that was kind of announced around the same time. So I don't know.
There was the Cali Columbia Temple groundbreaking has been announced for March 2025, and that'll be presided over by I assume Jorge Becerra. I don't know. Maybe
Becerra.
Spanish. I don't know. Um,
I
and
think.
the South America Northwest area. What's
Sorry,
that?
I'm trying to pronounce his name.
Oh,
Becerra.
Becerra.
Sorry.
Becerra. Um, so, and then also there's an artistic rendering of the Tacloban City, Philippines temple, and that's been released. So people can go check that out if they would like. We also have an update, an interesting update on the McKinney, Texas temple, which we talked about the last time we hosted. A lot of controversy around that. And the main update is that the church has agreed to a to a non-binding mediation and that which adopts plans to build a 35-foot temple with a 120-foot spire. The original plans were for 65-foot temple and 174-foot spire. So they agreed to potentially build a smaller version of the temple, but it sounds like the residents are still not happy with that because it would still be the tallest building in the town. So that's interesting. And I know that we had talked about that you had an interesting religious liberty angle, and that certainly is still something that lingers in this story. But the other angle that we had talked about is that the church, in building more temples, also seems to be finding itself in more circumstances where locals are frustrated or upset with the church over the planned design for the temple. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, how this mediation goes, and if the church gets a temple the size they want, or if the town people get a temple the size they want, or no temple at all. So anyway, that was all very interesting.
Yeah. Something I kind of wanted to add to that. I don't know if you saw on this last paragraph here, but apparently there was another church that had been proposed that was a Christian church, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here, Creekwood United Methodist Church. And they had proposed a church with a 154-foot bell tower. And this church had been greenlit. And I think that there's a little bit of, I guess, murkiness around this. But from this article, it said that the Salt Lake City Tribune reported that council minutes from that year explicitly stated that this tower was approved. But what happened later, I think, was for whatever reason the church never got built. And so some, I think, LDS members in the area are kind of like, well, hey, why did you guys, greenlight this other Christian church? And there wasn't this big controversy surrounding it, And so, again, I do think that in this
Let me ask you a question
situation.
about that, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
If the reason they don't want the church built in the area, the temple, is because of anti-Mormon sentiment or anti-Latter-day Saint sentiment, I guess, I don't know how to
Mhm.
because of anti-Mormon sentiment, what would be the best approach for the church to mediate that, to ameliorate that sentiment?
Yeah.
Do you? Because my instinct
I
would
think
say
they should do what they
it ought to
say.
be
Yeah.
to build a temple larger than they, want. Like it seems like strategically, if the issue is anti-Mormon sentiment, you would want to take away every kind of excuse or gripe that they had and prove to them we're good integrated members of your community. We're not here to cause a fuss. But
Yeah. I 100% agree with you. Yeah, I think that I don't see why the church would be sort of. I don't understand why they would want to be difficult to work with in this situation, and even if they are sort of facing actual animus from people on the ground. Yeah, they should, especially when there's such a clear ordinance, it seems, for what is to be allowed or zoned. Yeah, I think that they should do that, even if there is
I think
bad.
we don't want to tread on too much ground we tread on last time, but I think that where the confusion comes in for me is that if there was an explicit religious reason why a temple had to be built in a certain way. For example, if a community said to Latter-day Saints, which there's an irony in the example I'm about to give because it doesn't even apply anymore, but if they said something like, we don't want you to display an angel Moroni anywhere because we think that's offensive. I think that's when you've got a really good case for like, well, now wait a minute. We're just talking about the displaying of a religious symbol that historically Latter-day Saints viewed as integral to a temple. But when you're talking about the size of a building and the height of the spire, that's what confuses me, is that seems like that's the easiest thing to just do what the community would prefer, because to make an argument that in order for our temple to operate properly, in order for us to worship properly in the way that we worship, we need to have a spire of a certain height. I don't know. I can't wrap my mind around it, because like we've talked about, there are temples that don't even have a spire, essentially.
Yeah.
So anyway, we don't have to tread over that ground too much,
Right.
again. Um, so another
Should we move
piece.
on to the next one, or was there something else you want to say about that?
No. I think we can move on to the next one. I don't know if you want to talk much about the Colesville branch being
Yeah.
restored.
So it seems like, yeah, I think I don't know exactly how this came up. They didn't really go into detail in the story, but there was a story on Yahoo that talked about a a branch in Greene, New York, which is about, I think, 20 minutes outside of Nineveh, kind of in that area where the church was founded. And this branch changed their name to the Colesville branch. And the Colesville branch, and JJ, you're the history buff, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the Colesville branch was the name of the first organized church of the LDS Church back in 1830. And I think the first counselor of the branch said that the name change is a fitting tribute to the heritage of the church. So it sounds like they're doing this just to kind of call back to the heritage of the church that that area has, and maybe it's sort of in conjunction with the upcoming bicentennial of the church in 2030. And yeah, I just thought that was kind of fun. I like stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
I know here in like Utah, there's a lot of historic wards and branches and stuff, and so I know it's not like an unending chain of, you know, like, oh, this branch has always been the Colesville branch or anything like that. But I think it's great when people are kind of trying to call back to our traditions and our history. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
All right. So we are nearing the end of our time here, and we are going to we're going to steal an idea from the twin siblings. They have a fun game that they do, big deal, little deal, or no deal. And honestly, I like love that segment. And I feel like whenever they do that segment, I'm always engaging because like I always disagree. I'm like, what? You think that's a big deal? That's a little deal. That's no deal, you know. So I think it's a great idea. So I thought we could knock out a couple more stories before we end, just doing that. And so the first story that we'll do is in the Capitol. Let's see where this is. This is in Church News in the U.S. Capitol. A statue of Martha Hughes Canon, frontier physician, suffragist, state senator, was installed in Washington, D.C. Is this a big deal, little deal, or no deal? 3, 2, 1.
Big deal.
Big deal. Yeah.
Oh, I went first.
I also thought it was a big deal. Okay. Why do you say that's a big deal, JJ?
I say it's a big deal, and we talked about this in our prep a little bit, which is I think that the Martha Hughes Cannon statue genuinely, I think it's a bigger deal for Utah than it is for the church. But the reason it's a big deal for Utah is because it represents um, efforts to try to reshape the narrative on what Utah is. And that's where I think that there was a real sincere bipartisan push. And by bipartisan, I actually just kind of mean interpartisan, kind of the Republican Party within itself, because the state is so predominantly dominated by one party, but a genuine push to try to make people what we would say, just diversity, to emphasize the diversity and the heritage of diversity in the state of Utah. And I think it's a big deal that the person who is in that statue is a woman, who was also a state senator and who was also a polygamist, somebody who was a polygamist wife. I actually think it's a pretty big deal that Utah chose somebody that was a female senator polygamist. Um,
Yeah.
but I also think, like we discussed before, I think that interestingly, the trends of what people care about and what people allow themselves to care about has shifted to a degree that I actually, if they were trying to replace the Philo T. Farnsworth statue right now with Martha Hughes canon, if that was a resolution that was coming up for the first time being proposed and discussed, I actually don't think it would happen, because I think that there has been such a strong concerted backlash to concepts of diversity and highlighting, things like that. So, and I'm the people who advocated for Martha Hughes canon right now might not say that it was because she was a woman or anything like that, but I certainly think it was hard. There was such a big backlash just 2 years ago when they changed the flag in Utah, and I think that it would be even more chaotic if they were trying to do Martha Hughes canon right now. So anyway, that's why I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, and I also have to sort of add that, like, I don't think it's just, obviously it's not just that she was a woman. I think that this was not only, maybe this was influenced by wanting to show more diversity in the state of Utah, but also she really was an amazing person. Just from the little bit that I've read from this article, she was the first female state senator. She was the
Right,
first woman
first
in
female
Salt Lake.
state senator, right?
Yeah, first female. I mean, that's a big deal in the country, right? And she was the first woman in Salt Lake to register to vote. I don't know much about Philo T. Farnsworth and why he was there, so I feel kind of bad for him, I guess. But
Invented the
um,
TV.
oh, he invented the TV. Oh, that's a
I
pretty
mean,
big deal.
essentially, I don't know it's like he invented the technology that led to TVs being
Uh,
developed, or something like that. But the other reason he was a controversial one is because I think he was technically born in Idaho.
oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what's
So,
interesting, though, that I kind of want to highlight is that, again, like you even kind of hinted at, like, well, it's not just that she was a woman; it's that she was an interesting person. But the things that you're highlighting are that specific to her gender, she was a groundbreaking individual. You know what I mean? And that was
yeah,
something that even 10 years ago, saying Utah would like to highlight the fact that the first female state senator came from the state of Utah. But what's interesting about it is the gender of the individual, is that it was not a
right.
man. This is the first woman who was an elected state senator and who was the wife of a polygamist. Like, she was a polygamist, a bigamist herself, right? Part of a polygamous relationship. Um, the person that she unseated for her state Senate seat was her husband. So the
Hmm.
man, a male polygamist, ran for office, was running for reelection, and one of his polygamous wives ran against him and beat him. And so that's what I mean by it's a story that, in the modern context, it's the reason it's such an interesting, empowering story is because it is very, like, coded with women in this context, even in a kind of patriarchal polygamous context, kind of overcoming that. And really, and Utah wanted to highlight that that's things like that happen in Utah. Utah is built on the backs of pioneers that do that kind of stuff. But I don't
Yeah,
think message wise, it's not as accepted right now.
politically salient right now. Yeah. Also, she was 4'11", which is
Wow.
also pretty crazy.
Yeah, I bet there's
So
not a
now
lot of
we have,
politicians that are 4 foot
maybe we
11.
also have the shortest statue in the U.S. Capitol.
Maybe.
So that's something worth saying. Okay, let's go to the next one here. I'm just gonna skip JJ to, okay, offensive chant
Oh, come on,
directed.
you can't skip the other one.
Okay, I'll go back to it. Okay, but well, since I already started this one, I'll do this one real quick. Offensive chant directed at BYU at Providence College, and this offensive chant is expletive the Mormons. Okay. That is the chant. Okay, is this a big deal, a little deal, or no deal? Three, two, one.
Little.
Little deal. Did you say little?
Yeah, I said little deal.
Okay, same. Dang it. We're not very interesting.
Yeah.
Why
Why
did
do
you
you?
say little deal? Why did I say little deal?
Yeah, I talk more on Martha Hughes Canon, so why don't you
Okay.
talk more about why you thought this one was a little deal?
I say little deal because I think that it's, I don't want to say big deal because it's funny when I said this, I actually kind of undecided on this one, and that's probably why I went through for the middle. I don't know if it's a big deal because, college students will be college students and they're going to say dumb stuff and they're not going to really think through what they're saying, and so this sort of discussion about offensive things said against LDS people in sporting events, it's like, well, you're kind of in a different environment where that's maybe a little bit more, things are a little bit more loose there, they're more rowdy. It's like saying, maybe somebody did something wrong in like a bar or something. It's like, it's kind of to be expected. But I do think it is indicative of a certain attitude towards Mormons that maybe flies under the radar a little bit. That, for me, it might be like people are thinking or having a certain attitude, and only at a sporting event would that like come out. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that it should be ignored. But I also do question, should we be offended by this?
Yeah, and which is the more offensive? Is it the F word or is it the Mormons?
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean?
I'm just joking because um
No, it's the Mormon aspect. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Now
also, I also want to add that that Providence College, the athletic director issued an apology, and also this happened at University of Oregon just a couple years ago too. And so this is the same. I think this is the same chant that happened at University of Oregon. So anyway, go ahead.
I think the reason I view it as a little deal is because I think that people being rude is a deal, like is bad, like
Yeah.
you said. Um, but the reason I don't think it's a big deal is because I don't think that there is like a high likelihood that there is an underbelly of kind of seething anti-Mormon sentiment at that college, because I actually don't think that most people, particularly at a sporting event, they probably don't even fully understand what a Mormon is. The only context they have is they know that BYU, it's a bunch of Mormons, but they don't know like what that means. You know what I mean? Um, and that's something I think that people really understand when you're outside of the Utah context. That most people be like, people will say crazy things like, "Oh, Mormons is that," like they associate Mormons. I think more they tend to confuse members of the church more with the Amish than they do like Jehovah's Witness, which surprises me. Um, for some reason, I think a
Hmm.
lot of people just like understand like, oh, the Jehovah's Witness is a religion and they have all, these things, but they view Mormons as like a people. There's just like a group of people that do weird things. And it probably goes back to that, um, you know, discussion on the word of wisdom and frontlining the behavior over the beliefs. That a lot of people, they know that Mormons are people that like live that they're people that live straight laced lifestyles, but they don't totally get, evangelicals, they watch the God Makers and they have all these strong opinions about Mormon theology and they, whatever. But people at sporting events, honestly, would they don't totally get it, is all I'm saying.
No.
So I just don't think it should be viewed as that big of a deal.
Especially college students.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. This will be our last one. Okay, an article
Just gotta
in
avoid that other one.
the Church News that says, basically more people serving, more people joining. Basically saying that the number of missionaries serving right now in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has reached a high mark of around 80,000. Okay. Big deal, little deal, or no deal? I'm like trying to think of it as I'm saying this.
Mhm.
Um, okay, 3, 2, 1. Little
No.
deal. No deal. Okay, so JJ said no deal. I said little deal. I'll just say why I thought that this was a little deal. Mostly just because there wasn't a lot of context given in this article. We'll put it in the show notes, and I think it is awesome if there is if we're at a high mark of 80,000 um, missionaries serving in the church right now, but it just seemed to not have a lot of context involved with it, and I wasn't sure how the article didn't really convince me of its headline, I guess, which
Mhm.
is like, that the church is doing better than ever right now. And so that's why I would say little deal.
Well, I would say no deal, but for basically the same reasons. But also, you know, having served in South America, if there's one thing I know about the church, it's that they really know how to cook their numbers. So, and that may be too controversial a statement for this podcast, but unfortunately, I speak from experience, and I think that the missionary number in particular, it's simply not it's not a longitudinal thing, right? They've made so many changes to the missionary program in the past couple of years. And one of them, obviously, the age change happening, gosh, that was like a decade ago. But on top of that, a greater push and effort for uh, older couples to serve. So it seems like saying, well, there's more missionaries than there used to be. In my view, it's, well, you're also getting missionaries from different places than you used to. Like, this is not a chart of longitudinal growth. This
Right.
is, certain things have been reconfigured, and now we can say that if we just look at raw numbers, things are, and I don't know that for sure, but that's what I would suspect.
Yeah.
So that's my skeptical take on it. Why my base assumption is that it's probably no deal. I don't think that the church is like falling apart at the seams like the folks on ex-Mormon Reddit always want to believe. But I
Right.
also am very skeptical that it's as this article paints it.
Yeah. And I'll say in defense of sort of saying that this is a bigger deal than no deal would, be to say that, um, and maybe if they just gave it some context, that would go a long way. I think it's great that they are expanding missionary opportunities and that members of the church are taking advantage of those opportunities. I know that they recently changed the age for single men to be able to serve missions, I think to like 40 or something. And it made me feel very old because technically I could serve a senior mission in 3 years, which
Why not? You know?
yeah. I never thought I would say that. But yeah, I feel like the church is just like always finding more reasons to like make me feel older than I am. But
Didn't they up the age that you could be in a singles ward?
sorry.
Didn't they up the age that you could be in a singles ward?
Um yeah, but I was just outside of that age when they did it. So
What is the
it
age
made me
now?
feel even older. What?
What is the age now that you can be to serve?
35.
So
Or
now,
is it 36? It's 35 or 36, yeah.
so now you can. What it seems like what they're basically saying is, all right, we're going to age you out when you hit 36. You can't be in the singles ward anymore. But if you still don't get married in the next 5 years, you can just go on a mission. Like, it almost
Yeah.
feels like they've like closed this gap. So if you never get married, you've actually got plenty to, you know, keep you
Yeah.
busy.
And to be clear, I've always actually kind of been in favor of them sort of giving these like opportunities for people to serve missions, like
Mm-hmm.
I kind of love the idea that like if you're a single guy and in your 40s, that you have this new purpose to serve in the church, because I think sometimes single men can feel a little bit like unwanted or maybe like directionless in the church. Like maybe they don't really know what to do with us. And so I think that saying like, hey, there are opportunities, like real opportunities for you to serve in a unique way, outside of like your singles ward or whatever, I think is great. So the fact that they are finding new ways to bring more missionary opportunities to members, I think is not a no deal, but it's not as big a deal as they seem to be implying here in this article. So,
Fair enough.
all right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us today, and yeah, we're gonna end it here. So we'll see you next time, and hope you guys have a great week ahead of you. Thanks a lot.